So welcome everyone to the first talk on the third noble truth. As we've been doing, the first talk is on the kind of conceptual understanding of the truth. The second talk is on the how we can know it in our direct experience. And then the third talk is how we know that we know it or integrate it into our life. So this one's more of a conceptual presentation of what the third noble truth is. So the third noble truth is really about reflecting on that it's possible, freedom is possible, liberation is possible through the cessation of grasping and pushing away, of clinging, pushing away or grasping onto what's arising in our experience. So it really points to the notion that this is achievable, this is possible, and that is the good news of the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth sounds like kind of crummy news that suffering's inevitable, and then here we are, that the extra suffering, at least, that we add on is we can avoid that by not grasping. So it's achievable. We're kind of no longer affected, in a sense, by the difficulties and pain that arise in our life. There's a nirvana refers to it as a word that's sometimes used. It translates as cooling. So there's no longer this fire that's burning, kind of like a heat. It's no longer burning, so there's a cooling. I don't know if you've noticed, but keeping the egoic mind, that self, going, it takes a lot of energy. It produces a lot of heat. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it letting go of that grasping and pushing away that perpetuates this self, egoic self, frees up a lot of energy. So there's really is a sense of a cooling in the body and the mind. So there's no longer a burning in kind of response to the arising of pleasant and unpleasant and neutral. The mind is kind of with whatever's arising in each moment and isn't disturbed by it. So you kind of can remain equanimous or calm, contented, whatever word we want to use, composed, even in the midst of activity. So that's what we're pointing to here. And we're not getting rid of an apparent separate self. We're just seeing it for the illusion that it is. So we're not trying to get rid of, sometimes people come to this practice and they hear, not self, and they think, oh, I have to obliterate this thing called the self that seems to cause me a lot of problems. I can do. I need to get rid of it, but it's not that at all. It's simply seeing it as the illusion that it is. So we don't stop having emotions. We don't stop getting sick. We don't stop aging. We're still gonna physically die, get sick. So the conditions that create dukkha still exist. We're just not affected by it all. Here's by Anthony DeMello, who I've quoted before. Actually, I think might have even had said this quote before. It's one of my kind of go-to favorites. Enlightenment is absolute cooperation with the inevitable. Enlightenment is the absolute cooperation with the inevitable. In the guided meditation, I talked about just being with, nature arising, life unfolding. So it's the absolute cooperation with nature unfolding. It comes this cessation or the resulting freedom. It's referred to by many names. I think when I gave it the title, I always try to think of snappy titles that might intrigue people to want to hear the talk. I think I called it what is enlightenment, but it's also referred to as the unconditioned, non-suffering, the unborn, the deathless, the absolute, awakened, emptiness, satori, Buddha mind, pure mind, non-duality. So there's lots of different names that are given to this, and the words may not be all that important. In fact, we can perhaps grasp onto words and concepts. I'm going to read a quote here. Find it. 62 from Ajahn Sumedho, who we've had him actually speak. We played a talk of his. It's one of the early students of Ajahn Chah in Thailand. He said, and I quote, "Do not feel as though you have to embrace any particular teacher's interpretation of total cessation, or even that you have to quickly come to your own understanding of cessation. Instead, let it be an open question, a mystery, and live the question. What is possible in the way of freedom for me right now in this very moment, just as I am? Let it be an open question, a mystery, and live the question. What is possible in the way of freedom for me right now in this very moment, just as I am?" So you don't have to embrace any teacher's interpretation. That's how he starts. So I'm giving you the teacher's interpretation right now. So you don't need to embrace it. Take it for what it is finger pointing at the moon. Actually, I think I might. Well, before I do that, so why am I giving this conceptual understanding of enlightenment or awakening? I think it's useful to know the process, and it's useful to know what might unfold, and it's useful to know some of the dangers or traps that can arise, some of the cul-de-sacs that you might get in, where you can kind of swirl around, go in circles for a while, chase your tail, so to speak. But we also have so I think it has its usefulness, its utility in that regard. But we also have to watch that we don't grasp at it, get attached to concepts that you hear from teachers or read in books, and make it a project for the ego. The ego can easily hijack this process if we're not careful. So that's why I'm presenting it. So the finger pointing at the moon, I say this all the time, and I thought I'm gonna share the actual story. I came across it. So it's the Zen story called Finger Pointing at the Moon. A Zen teacher's dog loved to romp around with his master. The dog would bound ahead to fetch a stick and then run back, wag his tail, and wait for the next game. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his students to join him. A boy so intelligent that he became troubled by the contradictions in Buddhist teachings. "You must understand," said the teacher, "that words are only guideposts. Never let the words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I will show you. With that, the teacher called the happy dog. Fetch me the moon, he said to the dog, and pointed to the moon. Where is my dog looking? Asked the teacher of the student. He's looking at your finger. Exactly. Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing that is being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person fights their way through other people's words to find their own truth. So I give all that as kind of preamble to to all of what I'm about the concepts I'm now about to heap onto you about what this is. But again, I do think it has some. I think it does have some utility. In fact, for many years in my younger years, insight meditation teachers would never even talk about this. It would just not be. It wasn't even mentioned in a lot of books if you read the early books from insight meditation teachers. That's shifted a little bit. I don't know why, but there are. You heard Ajahn Sumedho talking about it fairly directly, and I've heard Joseph Goldstein and others also speak about it more directly. So, what are some of the I mentioned about the dangers of this being hijacked by the ego? So we start to think that there's an I that gets enlightened. So notice if you see that arising, this sense of, wow, I would really like to achieve this enlightenment and have, calm and peacefulness. Right? Really watch for that. If it's an I that's wanting to become enlightenment, it's the egoic me that is really grasping at wanting to become an enlightened person. So it's really important that we notice if that's occurring. My teacher Matthew Flickstein said, the quote: "If both dreaming and escape from dreaming are imaginings of the mind, what is the way out? There is no need for a way out, since a way out is also part of the dream. All we need to do is see the dream as a dream, or see the illusion as an illusion." So even the idea that you can escape from the illusion or see the illusion is all part of the illusion. Yeah. So there's no I that has an enlightenment experience. Right? How could there be an I? It's an illusion. It's a fabrication that we've constructed in our minds. So it's more like awareness becoming aware of itself. In the guided meditation, I talk about, just sensing into awareness, that the context, awareness, becoming aware of itself. And really that's not even true. There's just awareness. Something else that might be useful to know is that awakening or enlightenment is instantaneous, but the mind gradually becomes clearer. So our old habit patterns fall away gradually. I mean, it took decades for our conditioning and habit patterns to solidify. So it can take a fair bit of time for these to release their energy, to be seen through. And as those release, there's more clear seeing as the old habit pattern, as we see through, as we see those habit patterns, recognize them. It stimulates more clear-sightedness. So it's really kind of an endless process. I remember somebody asked the Dalai Lama if he was enlightened, and he gave it his trademark chuckle and then said something along the line, and I'm paraphrasing, that it's an endless process, that you don't just become enlightened. And so I thought that was interesting. So there's kind of this misperception that it's an event and then it's done. Happiness is complete. You can go, you can check it off your to-do list and get on with life with this blissful, happy, calm demeanor. And really, that's a misperception. It's an endless process of seeing and our habit patterns dropping away. So it's more like, you could call it enlightening, more of a verb. We're practicing enlightening as opposed to saying we will become enlightened, or there is enlightenment, which is more as a noun. We could more say it's a process of enlightening. Here's a quote from Ram Dass. You may have expected that enlightenment would come zap, instantaneous and permanent. This is unlikely. After the first aha experience, it can be thought of as a thinning of a layer of clouds. I love that, a thinning of the layer of clouds. And that's the conditioning slowly and gradually dropping away. So we gradually see our conditioning, we gradually see the emptiness of all phenomenon. We see greed, hatred, and ignorance arise. Then it may immediately just dissolve once it's seen. Another way to put it is awakening or enlightenment is not perceiving through the ego. It's not seeing anything through the distortion called the egoic state of consciousness. So it's being in a natural state. Sometimes it's called the natural states. It's perception without distortion. So there's no lens. It's just the way things are. In Zen, it's called Satori, which is really points to a lifting of the veil, lifting away of the clouds, this distortion in perception. It's got very little to do with experiences or events. It's just not perceiving through the lens of the ego. Here's a quote from Adyashanti. It is easy to imagine that the Buddha, the awakened one, is something or somewhere other than here, or that awakening to reality will happen sometime other than now. But as long as we continue to think in terms of time, we will deceive ourselves. The you who is chasing enlightenment will never become enlightened. instead of striving towards some distant goal that you will never reach, I invite you to stop and ask, how am I avoiding the enlightenment that is already present in each moment? How am I seeing separation where it doesn't exist? So some advice there to watch to see if there is a chasing of enlightenment, a striving. And instead of saying, how do I become enlightened? Ask the question, how am I unenlightening myself in a sense? What am I doing? How am I avoiding the enlightenment that is already present in each moment? How am I seeing separation where it doesn't exist? So it's seeing things as they actually are, rather than through the lens of the ego. So you see everything as one, and the nature of all phenomenon is emptiness, just insubstantial, arising and passing away. So the other thing that it's not is it's not an altered state of consciousness. every other state is an altered state of consciousness. This is the natural state, right? So anything that's not natural, you could call an altered state of consciousness. And I don't know, perhaps the wildest altered state of consciousness is the ego, the egoic state. It's pretty wild when you think about it. This state of consciousness that's misperceives the reality or the way things are as separate, substantial, seeing a self where there isn't one. That's pretty wild. Seeing enemies where there aren't any. Seeing everything in terms of dualities when there aren't any. So that could be considered a fair, the penultimate altered state of consciousness. So if you want an altered state of consciousness, then stick with ego, because it's a pretty good altered state of consciousness. And there's many ways to achieve altered states of consciousness. In fact, some of practice techniques, some of the concentration meditations, you can achieve some fairly deep altered states of consciousness. Hallucinogens, they can, LSD or other hallucinogens can achieve an altered state of consciousness. But enlightenment is the natural state. It's the unaltered state of consciousness, the unaltered state. So Trungpa Rinpoche, a quote, he said, "Enlightenment is ego's ultimate disappointment." Enlightenment is the ego's ultimate disappointment. It's not what the ego thinks. The ego thinks the ego is going to be happy. I'm going to be a happy ego. So it's that, in that sense, it's the ultimate disappointment. It's not a process of making the ego, having a happy ego, if I can put it that way. I don't know. It makes sense in my mind when I say that, but hopefully this is making some sense to you as well. So the enlightenment is an unaltered or unaltered state of consciousness, or natural state. Right? So you don't need an altered state of consciousness to perceive what's natural, what's real, what's actually is. So when we have insights or we have awakenings, because we can have some awakenings or insights. What's important in that process is how much of the ego falls away, how much of the ego is let go of in the awakening. So it's how much of the revelation doesn't last forever. It doesn't sustain itself. You don't kind of remain in that with that state, awakening moment. But how much of the ego falls away in that, and what remains with you is what falls away. This is what will go forward in your perception as you perceive less of it through the ego. And it also frees up energy. I think I mentioned the egoic state takes a lot of effort to maintain itself. It must be continually fueled in a sense. So when we stop putting energy into the egoic state, it frees up a tremendous amount of energy. Here's a quote from Ramana Maharshi. There's no greater mystery than this, that we keep seeking reality, though in fact we are reality. There is no greater mystery than this, that we keep seeking reality, though in fact we are reality. So we can see this in any moments. It's not something that we achieve down the road. It's not a time-bound thing. It's we just seeing each moment as it is. And this is why the Buddha talks about, grasping and putting away as the cause of suffering, because that grasping and pushing away is arguing with the moment. It's not allowing the moment to be as it is. It's struggling with the moment. It's in conflict with the moment. It's in division and not in unity with the moment. And that perpetuates the illusion of a separate self. So we're really just seeing that in fact we are reality. My teacher used to always say, you're already awakened. You have to see it. There's nothing to get. You just see it. And so that of course can become a process that we go through. I'm reading a lot of quotes. Here's another one by Ralph Waldo Emerson, beautiful poet, and many of his poems. Thoreau is another one. I think Emerson and Thoreau all their poems point to this freedom. And here's the quote from Emerson. We live in cessation, in division, in parts, in particles. Meantime, within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And this deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is all accessible to us is not only self-sufficing and perfect in every hour, but the act of seeing and the things seen, the seer and the spectacle, the subject and the object are one. So it's seeing that everything's is in unity. I think I heard one teacher put it as we are the environment, we are nature. We're not separate from it. I've been watching a lot of videos and films about the environment. You know how people have humanity has impacted the environment so much in the last, in my lifetime, and how this, I think, I see it as arising because we don't see ourselves as part of the environment, as being the environment. We see ourselves as separate, and when we can kind of control it in some way. And so seeing that we are part of this totality, and it's a whole. This is really what what we're seeing. And I think we perceive, when we perceive through the ego, we perceive a separate self. We perceive ourselves as separate. We can do great damage to ourselves, which is the environment. So seeing a awakening is kind of defined by this wholeness. It's not seeing in these, not referencing and acting in these polarizing ways of viewing experience. So everything is kind of seen as a seamless whole. Every dimension is part of the same whole. So even the illusion of the self is part of the whole. So I say we're not getting rid of anything. We're just seeing it for what it is. So we continue to live our lives, right? Because we're still a manifestation. Our personality, this body, is a manifestation of the whole. It is. How else can I say it? Every dimension is part of the same whole. The form and the formless are part of the same whole. I have another quote. Again, it's one of my go-to favorites, Nisargadatta. When I look inside and see that I'm nothing, that is wisdom. When I look outside and see that I am everything, that is love. And between the two, my life turns. So it's seeing that we're nothing and that we're everything. So we're experiencing all the dimensions at once. We're seeing the wholeness is appearing as a particular human being, which is nothing. Nothing separate. So I'll open it up for any questions and comments.
So I'm kind of left wondering. Perhaps you can help with this. Where the connection is between the talk tonight on the self and or the ego and clearly the role of the ego. In, ego has a role in dukkha, the arising of dukkha. How does it relate to the third noble truth? So maybe I'm getting ahead of things, but I'm left wondering.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, this isn't your typical third noble truth talk in a lot of ways. You know, in fact, the second noble truth talks where I talk about abandoning, clinging, and grasping and pushing away is really what many people talk about in the the third noble truth. Right? In the second noble truth, you're just talking about how craving causes um, suffering, and in the third noble truth, you're talking about how the abandoning of craving or clinging, the cessation of suffering arises through the abandoning of clinging. Yeah, that's this is just how I do it. In fact, I gave a retreat on the Four Noble Truths with another teacher, and I did the second noble truth, and she got real mad at me because I kind of stole her third noble truth talk. So then I showed her what I did, and she goes, "Well, I can't do that. I can't. I don't want to talk about enlightenment, but really." The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. It's possible, right? So it. Oh, somebody's trying to get in here. Um, so it is freedom, right? I mean, if we're talking about the cessation of suffering, I mean, that's freedom, that's liberation, that's enlightenment. So yeah, I kind of go right to it that way, and I think it yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. That's how it relates to the third noble truth is the we can, okay, let me put it another way. We can see how when we don't grasp or push away, that suffering doesn't arise, right? We can see that moment by moment. We can see it, right? We can. So, for example, I woke up this morning and I had a real, the mood of the mind was grumpy, kind of surly. You would say that if I got up on the wrong side of the bed or whatever causes and conditions came together, I was a real grump head. That was the mood of the mind, right? So, so a couple things can happen, right? The mind will start to produce all these thoughts based on the mood of the mind, which just spontaneously arose when I woke, as soon as I woke up, right? Um, could start produce all these thoughts that could, just spin it further and further and further, so that I could actually become quite, nasty and, lashing out at, all these kinds of things. Because the thoughts that were coming up were all very, judgmental and so but I could see through abandoning clinging, abandoning, not trying to push away those thoughts. Let's put it that way. Because abandoning clinging is abandoning grasping and pushing away. So not trying to push away the thoughts, just letting them be, they could just self-liberate, right? The thoughts would just flow through and self-liberate. So I could firsthand in each moment, I had a lot of those moments because that mood hung around for a while. I could see the cessation of suffering, right? Thought would arise, I'd see it, and suffering there'd be a cessation of suffering. So, you can talk about this truth in those kinds of, in that moment to moment basis. Um, what I did in this talk was I talked about it in terms of more of an awakening to that truth, that if we see reality for what it is, we see through the illusion of the ego. We see how we're misperceiving through an egoic state of consciousness, and just allow things to arise and be, that there's a total cessation of suffering, that this is in fact possible. So we start moment by moment. I mean, and noticing when we don't, when we do cling, or believe the thought, and kind of spin a story around it, and cause more suffering. We see that too. We see the cause of suffering. So we see the second noble truth when that happens. I guess what I was kind of pointing to is the possibility of total cessation. I think perhaps in insight meditation circles, there is a thought, an idea that awakening is a rare thing. And I think that's just a thought. I think it's just another thought. I think if we, like Sumedo said, if we live the mystery, we live the question, we see that freedom is possible right now, this very moment, just as I am. That it's not that rare. I mean, there you can, and I also, what's also important to realize is you can see this, but it doesn't mean that you'll never have another reactive moment. It could take decades for the conditioning to work its way through the system for that to fall away. If you want to, I guess, put it into Theravada Buddhism, um, a way of talking about this, you have the stream enterer. You have kind of the four stages: the stream enterer, the once returner, the never returner, and the arahant. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, the four-stage process that the Theravadan Buddhists talk about. The Zen Buddhists have their 10 ox herding pictures that display it, and the Tibetans, I believe, have their 12 stages of emptiness. It's kind of their model. But they're all, so if you take the Theravadan one, you're really looking at, entering the stream is really setting the aspiration that you want to know the truth. That the truth is what's important to you. What's the most important thing to you right now? Is it seeing the truth? Or is it, something else, which is fine. I mean, that may be what arises for you as the most important thing. So that's what stream entering is you're in a sense swimming against the current in a way. Because while everybody else is meeting their sense pleasures, chasing after sense pleasures, becoming this or that, you're in a sense, you've entered the stream, and in the way I look at it is you're actually swimming against the current. You're not kind of you want to know the truth. You're not just going with the truth as it's perceived by the ego, or the apparent truth. And then the once returner, you return back, and you turn back, you're back on the practice, and come back again. And the never returner is you're hooked. You're in this, and you're doing this practice. And that usually comes after some kind of an awakening, I believe. Some right view has established itself firmly in your being. And I think once right view is present, and you see that the egoic state of consciousness is the self is an illusion, and that the way the world is perceived through the egoic state of consciousness is a misperception, then it's just a process of the self dropping away piece by piece. And when that's all dropped away, apparently an arahant. That may be rare. I don't know. I guess it depends. Buddhists would say it depends on your karmic load. How much karma you're carrying around, how much stuff do you have to kind of work through, and how much needs to drop away. And that's, again, it's just what is. So that's how I kind of look at it. So I don't think it doesn't need to be. We don't want to grasp at it as a self, but we also don't want to say, "Oh, this is never going to happen." This is not going to be part of my what unfolds for my being. It is your being. You can see this no less or more than anybody else. Doesn't even matter what your karmic load is. You can see that. You can see this. It's kind of right in front of us. It's so simple. It's right under our noses. It's so many of the quotes pointed to. It's who we really are. It's the mystery that we keep seeking this, but it's the truth of it's our true nature. I can't even remember what the question was. I'm sorry. It must have been a good one. But yeah, that's how it relates to the third noble truth.
Well, I guess I have a question about words. I'm not sure how useful this exercise is, but you were talking about words being fingers pointing at the moon, and how we spend a lot of time struggling fighting our way through other people's words. So in the meditation, you use the expression a few times, still aware space. And sometimes you've referred to stillness, sometimes you've referred to awareness. And I was wondering, are you adding something different in with space? So I've been sort of, wondering about that and thinking, okay, like you have outer space, which if you ignore dark matter theories and stuff, is kind of like empty, and you have planets and everything in it. So are we kind of, is space here, are you referring to like a substrate in which thoughts, sensations, and sense of self is temporarily appearing? Or you're referring to a state of being that involves stillness and awareness? And I was just wondering what you were kind of pointing to with the use of the word space in that expression.
Yeah, so yeah, I use a lot of words that, and it's not trying to point to something specific. It's trying to point to, it's trying to offer point guideposts, a variety of guideposts that may resonate with one person more than another word. So the word space may resonate with some people more than still or quiet or awareness or a luminous mind, or and so on. So yeah, it's just kind of offering a variety of pointers so that people can. The important thing is feeling into it. So if a particular word assists in you in feeling into it and sensing into it, then it's a good word. If it doesn't assist you in feeling into it, then it's not a helpful word, right? It's so yeah, you just kind of let the words wash over you, and one that kind of you try to feel what I'm pointing to, and see what kind of what arises when that process is happening. So for me, and that's funny, I don't use the word luminous, but that's the word that really resonated with me. To me, it's like a light. It's like going into a dark room and then turning on the light, and there it is, right? It's things as they are. And some people, it's space. So you think of the space in a room, it's unaffected by whatever appears, whatever arises and it appears and fades in the room. The space is unaffected by that. We hear the word spacious being used. So that can refer, as opposed to contracted. So when we're a separate self, we tend to narrow down our perspective and feel contraction in the body. Whereas when we're open to what is, there's a feeling of spaciousness or space. So yeah, the words all can I guess resonate in different ways for different people. So I try to use a variety, but I'm not pointing to dark matter or kind of a wormholes or anything like that. It's yeah, I'll leave that to Star Trek and but that's why I use those types of even the word dimension, it's all one. There's really no dimensions. Even in the talk I gave, I said so many things that aren't true, right? Because I'm just putting things out there in a way. It's sometimes I say things that are absolutely true, but sometimes I say things that are a compassionate concession to the egoic mind. So I'm saying something. It's a concession to see if to the egoic mind, because the egoic mind is involved in this regardless, right? So in fact, the whole idea of a path is a concession to the egoic mind. There's no path. There's nowhere to go. Who's going to go there? Who's going, and where would it go? I mean, it's right here, right now, in this moment. So there's nowhere to go. There's no path. I mean, that's the truth. But we talk about the path, and the path to enlightenment, the path to, and so forth. But and that's a concession to the self, the separate self, the egoic mind. There is no path. There's no awareness being of aware of awareness. There's just awareness. So you hear, and that's fine. I mean, you can, you know, if the word, path, or the metaphor of climbing the mountain, if that's something that you relate, that you find helpful in your practice, then it's okay. There's no need to abandon it. I'm just saying it's really a concession to the self. But we do a lot of that in this practice, right? So it's part of the project. I'm using that word a lot now too, because Ajahn Verdamo used it, and I thought, yeah, it's good. That's a good word. The Buddha referred to the house builder, right? Yeah. I kind of love that I've thrown the egoic mind into a tailspin. I can see it on your faces, right? And in a way that's so helpful, that the egoic mind can go into a tailspin, or can just, I've so confused the egoic mind that it doesn't know what to grasp onto, right? Geez, I can't grasp onto the path. I can't grasp onto achievement. I can't. So it's just kind of like, there's nothing to grasp on. And that's the place of don't know mind. That's the place of mystery. It says that's the where to rest. So in a way, that just let that space, just that space, there's that word, that spaciousness, that light just be. And you can watch the egoic mind run around and do its thing. That's fine, and you don't have to stop it. That's just nature. It's what the egoic mind will do. It's no problem. It's like waking up with my mood. It's not a problem. It's just nature unfolding. It was a mood. Didn't need to figure out why. Didn't need to do anything with it except recognize it. Of course, the thought arose, how am I going to give a Dharma talk tonight in this surly mood? But, I went for an hour-long bike ride and kind of worked out some of the energy that it was producing. So there was, something there, some action that was also taken that released some of the energy that was accumulating in the body. But yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's no path. That throws the egoic mind. What do you mean? But all my books say the path through this, the mindfulness path through that, the mindful path to self-compassion, the mindful path through. I've got, I think, 10 books that say the word path on them. And they're all good books, right? They're all really good books. Path with a Heart, Jack Kornfield's book. Oh, awesome. Awesome book. Written from the heart. Yeah. Anyway. Anything else that's on your mind? Oh, something that just occurred to me